I want to talk about my friend Karine. You've got to come up here. So I just want to take the opportunity to celebrate and congratulate my friend, my colleague, my partner in truth, Karine Jean-Pierre, the next White House press secretary. Now, many people in this room have known her for some time, but for anyone who does not know her, I want to provide a little bit of a primer for you, so settle in. First, as you all know, she will be the first Black woman, the first out LGBTQ plus person to serve in this role, which is amazing because representation matters, and she is going to she will give a voice to so many and allow and show so many what is truly possible when you work hard and dream big, and that matters, and we should celebrate that.
All right, guys. So once again, we got to talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the racialized left-wing agenda that, in my opinion, is destroying meritocracy in this country. And Democrats do not want you to talk about it because a vast majority of the criticisms against DEI are true. The reason why you know they are true is because they're essentially trying to ban people from using the term in a negative light, okay? They're trying to say that if you call somebody a diversity hire, that is like calling them the N-word, even though Democrats are making it clear and obvious that, hey, we hired this person, we put this person in a role because they're Black, or the people let you know that, hey, we voted for this person because they're Black, not because of their policies, but because they're Black. Not because of their resume, not because of their qualifications, but because of their skin color, because they're gay, because they're a woman, whatever, right? This is what Democrats do. And when you criticize Democrats for it, when it goes wrong, when there's a disaster, and you see that clearly and obviously one of their diversity hires are in over their skis, they want to boo-hoo, whine, and cry, well, you're racist, right? Okay? And I want to talk about Roland Martin, okay, who responded to Joe Rogan, calling out the Biden administration and their clown show of diversity hires, including cringe Jean-Pierre, the worst White House press secretary in history. Okay, Jen Psaki, who happens to be white, is the second worst. Okay, but she is. I mean, come on. Everybody was criticizing Jen Psaki when she first got hired, and she was a white woman. Okay, everybody was like, "Yo, she's terrible." But for whatever reason, cringe Jean-Pierre managed to outdo her. Okay, so she's the worst in history, and people are rightfully criticizing cringe Jean-Pierre because essentially she's made it so the White House press conferences are a waste of time. Everybody knows that she's bad at her job. Everybody knows that. So again, Joe Rogan and Christopher Rufo are going to have a conversation, and they're going to call out the clear and obvious agenda of the Biden administration to put unqualified people into positions of power for representation purposes. And Roland Martin is going to have an issue with that. And I want to react to it. So without further ado, roll the clip.
It is interesting that he's so frail that he's transparent, right? And he's so transparent to the point where the White House press secretary accidentally tweeted as him from her account. You saw that,
yeah,
right? Which is wonderful. I love when that happens because it's like, thank you. I was wondering, and now I know. I was really confused. I kind of had a feeling it was you. Yeah. And is there ever been a worse White House press secretary? How did she get that job? She's so bad at convincing people. There's a bunch of like hardcore, ideologically driven left-wing pundits that are on YouTube that could do a way better job. And they would be fucking psycho about it. Yeah. They would be psycho about it, and the left would be like, yeah. Like, she's not the one. Yeah. Like, she's fucking terrible at it. She gets called out for stuff all the time. She gets set up for stuff all the time. Like, Peter Doocy's always setting her up. He talks to her.
Doocy's amazing.
He's so good. He'll provide a little bit of this, but then what about that?
Yeah.
And, she's just awful at it.
And she's only really challenged by one person.
Right.
In the briefing room, and still manages to bungle it on the daily.
Well, it's just there's so much madness that she has to, like, cover up.
It's and look, this is, again, a kind of brass tacks way of talking about it, but it's what happens when you put identity over competence.
Yeah.
Everyone knows, like, explicitly, and then when you hire someone, it's a big celebration of all the different intersectional identities the candidate has.
Yeah.
This is our first, Black, female, I don't know, LGBTQ, not really sure.
Yeah.
And so the problem with that, though, is when you're not making a decision based on competence, merit, excellence, you're buying into it at the front end on that different hierarchy of decision making. But then on the back end, you can't do anything about it. You say,
Right.
well, you elevated this person for identity. You can't fire that person because of incompetence.
Unless they steal women's clothes from the airport.
Yeah, exactly. Unless they get a little sideways, you know.
That guy was my favorite.
But the Harvard story is this exact
Yes.
phenomenon.
But see, the issue for me is not, issue for me is not even in this discussion, Karine Jean-Pierre. If you don't like her, that's up to you. You don't like her. So they clearly don't like her performance. Don't like what she's doing, how she does her job. But here's what I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on how Joe and Rufo this is identity. This is identity. And so when they said that, and I've said this beforehand, y'all notice, you never hear anybody white ever say, you know, you got into school because you're white. You know, you got this job because you're a white woman. You know, you got this job because you're a white man. You know why? Because see, when they say identity, do you know what it means? It means black, Latino, Asian American, Native American, woman, LGBT. Identity for them is never white men. Oh, it's never white men. But we all know some absolutely awful, mediocre white men and white women who've gotten jobs, major jobs. In fact, the previous Oval Office occupant had a host of people working for him who were utterly incompetent. And nearly all of them were white. In fact, he was unqualified. Donald Trump was a grossly unqualified white man who had no business in the job. But I use the word unqualified because I want to help y'all out here. See, here's what they do. They only use the qualifier qualified when talking about us. See, so they automatically assume when it comes to whiteness that they are qualified. That's what they do. And so and I know somebody's gonna say, well, Roland, you can't say that Joe Rogan is a racist. I didn't call him a racist, but he's pretty damn racial. And so is Rufo. See, they don't even realize when their whiteness comes through. Even in that conversation. See, if you believe that Karine Jean-Pierre is awful at her job, just say she's awful. Just say she's bad. But the moment you go to identity, now that changes the conversation. And again, I would love for anyone to show me where Christopher Rufo and Joe Rogan has ever said, man, that white guy is awful. He clearly got that job because he's a white guy, because he's a golf buddy with so-and-so, because he's a tennis buddy with so-and-so, because he sucks up to so-and-so. But that never happens.
Yeah, so you seen that, you heard that, okay? So Roland Martin is just being blatantly ignorant about what the criticisms of DEI are, which he's doing that on purpose. And he's also wrongfully conflating things like, for example, hiring based off race versus hiring based off, I guess, familiarity with a candidate, right? For example, you're hiring your friend or your buddy or whatever, and he's trying to say that, well, nobody ever questions white guys who get hired based off of being buddies with another white guy. But what Roland Martin fails to acknowledge is that, well, you're not hiring them because they're white, okay? Nobody ever gets hired because they're white, okay? If they get hired because that's your buddy or that's somebody that you're friends with, despite their qualifications, not having the qualifications, okay, yeah, that's something that we should criticize. And actually, Trump has been criticized for that. That's what Jared Kushner was criticized for, okay? And Trump got criticized for that. But it turns out Jared Kushner did a pretty damn good job in his role. I mean, he was essential in the Abraham Accords, which, at the time were a key step towards bringing more peace to the Middle East, okay, or making the Middle East more peaceful than it historically has been, okay, trying to normalize some of these relations between Israel and their Arab neighbors. Yeah, I mean, that was a historic thing that was done by the unqualified Jared Kushner hire, right? That, again, Trump got criticized for a lot. Okay. However, it worked out. But Jared Kushner wasn't hired because he was white. Okay. This is why you don't hear people criticize white men getting hired for being white, because white men don't get hired for being white. They may get hired for being buddies or their relationships. And in some cases, relationships actually are a qualification for the job, especially if you're talking about, you know, a sales position or some type of position that does require you to have a large network. It just depends. My point is that, yes, you do have, you know, legacy hires or people that just get hired for reasons that really don't have anything to do with the qualifications of the job or anything to do with merit or anything like that. That happens, okay? But it's not racial, okay? It's not racial. So that's not to say that you can't criticize people for making those type of hires. People get criticized for doing that all the time, putting people in positions of power simply based off, you know, relationships and things like that. Happens all the time. It's something that, again, gets criticized. Trump was criticized for that, okay? But, again, the reason why nobody ever says, well, you were hired based off the fact that you're white is because, quite literally, nobody ever gets hired because they're white. They might get hired for other characteristics that don't have anything to do with their job, but it wasn't their skin color. However, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that is what happens. Like I showed you guys at the beginning of this video, Jen Psaki, when introducing Karine Jean-Pierre, she did not lead with Karine Jean-Pierre's qualifications in her resume on why she's qualified for the role. She led with a bunch of attributes about Karine Jean-Pierre that had nothing to do with her actual qualifications. Karine Jean-Pierre being black and gay has nothing to do with how well she can do the job, right? I mean, that's clear and obviously evident by the fact that she's the worst White House press secretary in history, okay? Being black and gay ain't helping her out, okay? And the Biden administration has done this on multiple occasions, okay? For example, when it comes to Biden's VP pick, he picked Kamala because she was a black woman or a so-called woman of color. Biden came out and said, well, I'm just going to pick a woman of color. So when you come out and you say that, right, that's your number one attribute that you're looking for. That's the number one qualification. Of course, people are going to say, okay, well, clearly and obviously you're not picking the best of the best, or you're not picking the most qualified person, because you are basically saying that, well, the only pool of candidates I'm going to look at are ones that are women of color. I'm not even going to look at the men. I'm not going to consider anybody that's white. I'm simply just going to consider women of color. That's it. Yeah, so again, people are going to say, okay, well, you're not really basing your pick on qualifications. That is why it gets criticized, because you're excluding a whole group of people because you just want to pick somebody based off qualifications that have nothing to do with the job, right? It's one thing if you say, well, I'm only going to pick people who have experience in the government, right? Okay, people will say, all right, well, having experience in the government, you can argue, is an important qualification for being a VP. Okay, we can have that argument, right? Some people may agree or disagree with that. But again, that to me is a legitimate way of excluding people, right? Again, that has something to do with the actual job. But when you exclude people based off race and skin color, yeah, I think people are going to have questions about whether or not you're actually picking the best person. He did the same thing with Ketanji Brown Jackson. He said, well, I'm going to appoint a woman of color. A black woman. I'm going to put a black woman on the Supreme Court. So basically, again, you're not considering anybody else except black women. Now, surely, there have to be other candidates with other attributes that are just as qualified, not more qualified than her. But it could be possible that she was the most qualified. However, we'll never know, because you're coming out here and overtly telling us that you're excluding everybody else. You're not even considering anybody else because your number one qualification is race and sex, right? So again, you know, people like Roland Martin, it's just so funny to me. They want to boohoo, whine, and cry about the criticism of DEI when Democrats and people like him, you leave yourself open to the criticisms. Because here's the thing. You can hire your diverse clown show all you gotta do is just come out here and don't talk about it, right? If you just came out here and just said, hey, Karine Jean-Pierre got this job because she did this, she did that. This is her resume. This is what she did. And if you left it at that, nobody would say anything. If you put Ketanji Brown Jackson in her seat, okay, on the Supreme Court, and you just name all of her qualifications, okay, and you don't mention the fact, or you don't lead with the fact that she's black and a woman, nobody can really say anything. But when you come out here and do what Democrats always do, which is to lead with, well, representation matters. Karine Jean-Pierre is black. She's gay. She likes to sleep with other women, right? Like, when you do that, yeah, people are going to have questions and say, okay, well, did she get the job because of her experience? Like, what did she do to actually warrant being in this position? Because being black and gay ain't got nothing to do with doing that job. But again, see, that's the thing. They overtly do this, right? They put people in positions of power based off, skin color, who you like to sleep with, whether or not you like your genitalia. And they tell you that's what they're doing. And then once you criticize it and say, well, this is what you're doing, this isn't right, they want to put their hands up and say, well, you're racist. You're racist. Okay, you must hate blacks. But again, it's just so funny to me because the people that complain about this the most, right? People like Roland Martin that get so triggered. It's like, well, the reason why is because people like him benefit from this agenda, right? That doesn't value meritocracy. That's why he's always coming out here talking about how advertisers and the government needs to give black-owned media more money, right? His show. Well, here's a news flash, Roland. If your show actually got views, right? If your show actually was bringing in a large audience of people, if you weren't so exclusionary to a broader audience, like, for example, white people, maybe, just maybe, you wouldn't have to be getting on your knees begging people to support black-owned media, right? Because you have an audience. You have a broad audience that would bring advertisers to your show because, again, you can get viewership, right? But when your show doesn't get that much viewership, that's when you got to beg for that extra money. Well, you need to support black-owned media. When, again, if you just got the viewership, which is merit, right? In this space, viewership is merit. If you got the viewership, if you focused on that, maybe stop being so exclusionary. Maybe you wouldn't have to get on your knees and beg for money. The money would just flow right on in because the advertisers would say, hey, this is where the view's at, right? So again, it's just so funny. These people who get so triggered by criticisms of DEI, these are the people that benefit the most, right? It's a threat to the agenda, right? It's a threat to their livelihoods. That's why they get so upset about it. But again, that's not to say that every black person is a DEI hire. I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the DEI agenda, where you are overtly placing people in positions of power or giving people opportunities or putting people in certain jobs or electing certain officials because of their skin color, their race, who they like to sleep with, whether or not they like their genitalia, that actually hurts qualified individuals who do have those characteristics that do deserve to be in those positions of power or in those jobs or in those roles. Because now people are going to start to ask questions, okay, about qualified individuals who should be in those positions of power because we're so used to seeing people being placed in those positions of power for other reasons that are placed above or given more priority over their actual qualifications. So when they get in that position that they shouldn't be in and then they mess up, they do a bad job, it just makes it look like, well, anybody that is placed in that job that is, a so-called person of color or that may be gay or trans or a woman, oh, well, they just got their job because they're not white, right? They're not a white male. And that's unfair, right? It is unfair to so-called minorities that are qualified, that should be in these positions, when you are, basically choosing people based off things outside of merit, okay? That's the problem. So, again, these people are going to come out here and they're going to boohoo, whine, and cry about the criticisms of DEI, but the boohoo, whine, and crying is just a symptom of the fact that, hey, the criticisms are legitimate, right? The criticisms are a threat to the agenda, right? That, hey, we're over the target when it comes to, calling out this agenda from the left. So, hey, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.